and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it.
Soon, very soon, the vast majority of the human race will ask themselves this question: why did we not see the converging catastrophes closing in on every side when the warning signs were everywhere? Ideology, preconception, normalcy bias, and wishful thinking are even now keeping the majority from recognizing that the trouble is not off in some distant horizon. It's kicking the door in right now. This is Dane Wigington with GeoEngineeringWatch.org radio for the week of January 28th, 2017. There are far too many breaking stories to cover in this show, but I'll do my best. This commercial-free news hour is brought to you by GeoEngineeringWatch.org, paid for by GeoEngineeringWatch.org. This show is broadcast on KQMS throughout Northern California on 1670 AM, 104.9 FM, and 105.7 FM. Recordings of this show can be found on GeoEngineeringWatch.org under the Radio, Recent, and Top Stories sections and the KQMS archives. Also, this show is broadcast on the East Coast on the PRN radio network, 2 p.m. Saturday afternoons. Updated shows are now being put on the PRN radio network podcast call-in number. I know there was a delay on some of those shows that was brought to my attention. I think it's being updated now. If you want to use a telephone to call in for any one of the last 5 shows, that number is 1-701-719-0991. For those who live in Shasta County in the Redding area, as always I state, at Orchard Nutrition there are free materials there, DVDs, documentaries about climate engineering, about the vaccination dangers that the mainstream media is doing their best to hide from us, diligently trying their best, because the whole system is based on certain industries. That must be remembered, and the medical industrial complex is one of those primary industries, especially in the Redding area. They are invested in the public not understanding the dangers, and even physicians who convince themselves they're doing the right thing have not looked at this information. It's simply too costly to their bottom line. When you have pediatricians being paid $400 per patient by some of the major healthcare providers for the administering of the full set of vaccinations, and those pediatricians can lose their entire massive bonuses if they don't fully administer vaccinations to at least 63% of their patient loads, we're talking about immense amounts of money at stake if vaccinations aren't administered. And that's the bottom line, and that's scary. It should be scary. If the health of our children is sacrificed because there are other interests in play here, what kind of society are we? What sort of parents are we? Find out what you don't know. Again, free DVDs, vaccination dangers, climate engineering, information on 9/11 coming from almost 3,000 architects and engineers from all over the globe, some of the top people, top experts in the world. Find out what you don't know. Visit Orchard Nutrition. Get some free data. Share that with others, please. We're trying to pay for everything we can. It's difficult to provide these materials, but if you put them to use, we'll try to continue as best we can with that. Library event at the Redding Library in Shasta County, Saturday, February 4th, from 3:30 to 5:30 p.m. This will be a free viewing of a very powerful and alarming documentary titled Fluoride, Poison on Tap. If you think it's healthy to drink fluoride, then you've bought into the absolutely ridiculously false propaganda. Come watch this film. Find out what you don't know. Free materials will also be at the library. I'll be there for Q&A from 5 to 5:30 after the film is over. Find out what you don't know. This is critical data that the news media, through corporate media, will not tell you. Speaking of blocking out the truth, Vaxxed, the incredibly powerful film exposing, thanks to a CDC scientist whistleblower, the known vaccination dangers that the CDC has been hiding. Vaxxed was canceled at a London viewing this last week. Why? Because there's political pressure. Why? Because money's at stake. Why? Because the medical industrial complex can't afford to have the public wake up to what's really going on with the vaccinations. Watch Vaxxed online and find out what you don't know. Again, information released from a CDC scientist whistleblower, top scientist at CDC. Now there's about a dozen scientists starting to blow the whistle at CDC. The leaks in the dam are building as the criminal cabal that has taken control of the medical industrial complex at unimaginable expense to our children and ourselves. Those diabolical secrets are starting to leak out. The public must wake up to this issue. Legal update on the battle to expose and halt climate engineering with the Legal Alliance to Stop GeoEngineering. We are in the Freedom of Information Act request stage still. The wheels are still progressing forward. I can't disclose all the maneuverings of the legal team. That's not beneficial to the team or their efforts. But I will make more announcements when permitted and when appropriate. In the meantime, the bottom line is a critical mass of awareness. That effort takes all of us every single day, sharing credible, verifiable data with those around us, helping to wake up our friends and families. And remember, conveying dire and thus unwanted truths does not make one well received amongst the majority who would rather not hear the unvarnished truth. But the truth must be told just the same. It's not an option. It's an obligation. On to more headlines from this last week. Trump issues gag orders on science agencies. Shouldn't that be alarming? Where's the change? When Obama did the same and now Trump immediately is following suit, shouldn't that alarm us? Yes, it should. Another headline, establishment outraged as Representative Tulsi Gabbard goes to Syria on a fact-finding mission. Why would that outrage the establishment? Because they don't want you to know the truth. They don't want you to know that the Syrians know and the rest of the world knows that the U.S. government has been arming terrorists, including al-Qaeda terrorists in Syria, because that's what fuels the military-industrial machine. So when conflict, weapon sales, that's what fuels the machine. So when an incredibly courageous representative like Tulsi Gabbard goes herself to find out what the facts are and was told, or rather I should say asked by the Syrian people, why is your government arming terrorists that are toppling our government? And how many countries has this happened in? I could go through an entire list. And that outrages the establishment because they don't want the public to wake up. And people like Tulsi Gabbard, as I just mentioned earlier, are demonized because they're trying to tell the truth. She should serve as an example for all of us. More headlines outlining the real state of the global economy that you're not being told as the artificially inflated, completely fabricated stock market continues to hit record highs. Here's a headline. Try to plug this into the record high stock market. Inside Sears is in the department store Sears, death spiral. How an iconic American brand has been driven to the edge of bankruptcy. That doesn't sound like a great economy, does it? Let's go through some more headlines to outline the reality that underlies the artificially inflated stock market that keeps the population pacified. Another headline, major Australian home builder goes bust. These are just samples from around the globe. Another headline, abandoned ships, as in container ships, as global shipping industry struggles, crews pay the price. Massive slowdown in global shipping, so how can the market be at record highs? Not too hard to connect these dots if one looks at the truth. Another headline, maritime terrorism, cybercrime, kidnapping, and ransom are the new, quote, new Somalia for today's shipping industry. People are desperate all over the globe, and as the Somalis were demonized for their pirating, and certainly I'm not condoning that, but what you weren't told is that the multinational fossil fuel corporations completely destroyed their ability to survive. They destroyed the environment. The fish are dead. They can't survive. What do people do when they can't survive? And we're all about to find out soon as the industrialized societies begin to collapse as well. So there are new forms of desperation showing up. Should be no surprise. Another headline. A $90 billion debt wave shows cracks in U.S. property boom. All part of it's simply a Ponzi scheme. The whole stock market is a Ponzi scheme. And that scheme is beginning to break down. Artificially inflated values, printed money, all kept afloat, which has fueled an economy that has needed a massive military machine to exploit, pillage, plunder, and loot other countries in order to keep the party going here, if you will. And that's exactly what's happened, but it's breaking down now. It can't go any other direction. It will break down as the environment implodes. Another headline: Bill Gates could become the world's first trillionaire. I don't care how much money Bill Gates has. We know what kind of individual he is, and his money won't help him with the future that's unfolding around all of us. It won't matter at all. Another headline: Man who predicted collapse of euro against Swiss franc now warns huge shock will bring the world to its knees. The stock market, finances, retirement accounts, all of those things that global economists seem to try to convince us have a life of their own that's not connected to the environment, that's a lie. That's an unimaginable lie. If the environment doesn't produce, if humans don't have enough habitat to survive, all the numbers in the world on the stock market screens don't mean anything, nothing. And we're all about to find out how true that statement is. Another headline: Boeing to start Trump era with new wave of downsizing. Another headline that doesn't really plug into the record high stock market, does it? And even in that arena of the military industrial complex, and even with Boeing making tankers that are being funded with behind the curtain resources, because as I've stated in other shows, since the late 90s, the Pentagon can't account for about $8.5 trillion. Much of that went to companies like Boeing, building tankers for the climate engineering programs that are so incredibly visible in our skies. The single greatest environmental assault ever launched by the human race is climate engineering, toxic climate engineering. And even with that going on, Boeing is still laying off and downsizing. The military-industrial machine that has fueled modern society is starting to come apart. The wheels are coming off. The only thing they can do to keep it going is to try to spur more global conflict, and we should be incredibly alarmed about that, because that's the direction they'll try to go. More headlines. With Trump's swearing in, Israel pushes ahead on new settlements. From that report, Israel announced plans Tuesday to build 2,500 more settler homes on the West Bank, moving to step up construction just days after the swearing in of Donald Trump brought to power a U.S. administration seen as friendly to the settlement movement, the illegal settlement movement. We are building and we will continue to build, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu wrote in a Facebook post. Report continues. Trump has already invited Netanyahu to visit the White House next month, and both men, after speaking on the phone Sunday, promised close coordination on a range of sensitive matters, including settlements. The Israeli settlements are a complete violation of international law. Look it up. That's a fact. For those that are fed the false narrative from the U.S. media, I'm simply trying to get at the facts. That's all. And why is the U.S. sending Israel tens of billions of dollars a year? Israel is the only country not to sign the nuclear non-proliferation agreement in the Middle East, by the way. And I would ask some hard questions that many don't want to ask. Why aren't U.S. citizens outraged when Israel violates international laws again and again and again? And many Israelis are outraged, by the way, and I salute them. This is about the government of the country, not all the people, about the government. Why is Israel the only nation that is allowed to violate international laws without consequence? Because U.S. citizens have not been given or told the full truth on countless fronts, including this one. And for those who want a sample of what they've not been told, search for documentaries online about the USS Liberty. USS Liberty. Watch some of those short documentaries and you will be shocked at what you didn't know, and that's only a sample of what you haven't been told. I'm trying to get at the truth. Many don't want the truth because their biases, their preconceptions, and their ideologies interfere with any desire to know the truth. Continuing, why isn't the human race focused on the effort to survive, on the effort to preserve the planet's life support systems? And for all the gun-toting, weapon-toting, ammunition-buying survivalists, do you really believe that stocking up on weapons and ammunition will ensure your survival on a planet that on the current course will soon no longer support life? And how long is the list of human activities, planning, preparation, precautions, research that relates to issues which will soon not matter if our species stays on the current course? Why won't it matter? Because none of us will be here on the current course. We must prioritize properly if we are to have any chance of long-term survival. If the human race was truly interested in having any chance of long-term survival, our species would be engaged in trying to restore our habitat, our environment, without which we will not exist much longer. But even if a choice was made, for example, the human race engaging in mass planting of trees all over the globe at this late hour, would it matter if the trees planted died or did not grow? And in fact, that is the case, and I can say that firsthand. I live in the middle of a boreal rainforest in northern California where I used to be able to plant in a day, myself, 300 trees or more, saplings. They're called plugs. And if you know how to plant them properly, you can get a 95% start rate. They will grow no longer. Not only do they not grow, and there's no point in planting trees anymore because they die. Even the existing native trees are dying everywhere. If the trees die, we die. How simple is that? A few more notes on Mr. Trump. In addition to endorsing torture during the last week, is the American population shocked by anything? He's endorsing torture immediately? Is that part of our values? I once knew a prominent local businessman that was here speaking to me in my property, and he claimed to have strong spiritual beliefs, but he thought torture was fine. And no matter what my relationship was with him prior to that, when that came up, that subject, and his opinion on that came up, and the incredible hypocrisy with his claimed spiritual beliefs was considered in that equation, I asked him to leave my property, and I've never spoken to him since, ever. Because no matter what our relationship was, I won't be a part of that. Never. And how many individuals with no charges, none, have been locked up in Guantanamo for how long? And I'm not saying there might not be some bad people there. But if you can't bring charges against them and you torture them, what does that make our country? Are we any better than any of the rest? And on the drone strikes, as I brought up in previous shows, when our drone pilots are double tapping, that's a term people should remember, double tapping, when they strike a target that they don't even know with any certainty is a credible target that's terrorist and how many civilians are going to die, and then they wait until the civilians from the town come to that bomb site to try to find out what happened, and then they bomb it again? Is this what our country's about? I don't want to be a part of that. Not in my name. Is this what any of us want done in our name? Is this what the American dream is all about? This type of behavior for which we condemn other countries but are doing ourselves? It's time to look in the mirror. Another headline. USDA scrambles to ease concerns after researchers were ordered to stop publishing news releases. More silencing of agencies. One more headline. Trump issues EPA media blackout and suspends agency grants. Now, I have no love for the EPA at all. I'm communicating, as I've stated in previous shows, with a USDA District 6 whistleblower that has been fired from the USDA for trying to expose the fluoride issue, the type of the fluoride that's being used and the consequences, the quantities that are so far in excess of any health limits. And there's no safe limit for fluoride ingestion, by the way. No safe limit. The same with aluminum. And he tried to bring also to light the fact that there is massive aluminum contamination in precipitation that he connects to climate engineering, rightfully so. He was fired. I'm communicating with him now. I hope to have a statement from him soon. So I want to make clear I have no love for the EPA, but for the few good people in the EPA, like this particular individual, what happens when you gag even them? As if they're not gagged already, because U.S. scientists have no First Amendment protection, and as I've stated over and over in previous shows, federal gag orders previously on all National Weather Service and NOAA employees, because our government certainly does not want the population to wake up to the fact that climate engineering, highly toxic, devastating climate engineering, is going on above their heads every single day. And when I hear from those people who convince themselves that if this was really going on, these agencies would speak out, how in the world are they going to speak out? What an absurd notion that these people from these agencies are going to be lining up to make their voices heard when they lose their jobs, their retirements, or much, much more, depending on how much they know. Who in their right mind would think such people are going to be lining up with no First Amendment protection, federal gag orders, Trump issuing even more of these now? Is the direction we're heading not crystal clear? Does it look like we're heading any different direction with this new administration? It doesn't to me. And my experiences with USDA biologists, by the way, I'm sorry to say, they're unlike this EPA official that I'm communicating with. I know local USDA scientists in Northern California that I'm sorry to say have shown no courage, no honor, none. And I worked extensively with some of these experts. And I've been in the field, as I've stated in previous shows, testing soils, getting pH values that were astoundingly higher than the baselines which we had in our possession, pH values that can only be attributed to the massive amounts of heavy metals in our rain, which alters rain pH, which begins to load the soils, which it's doing, and none of them had the courage to say anything officially. In fact, as I've stated in previous shows, I had one look at me in the field while we were testing and say, what do you want us to do about it? How about standing up, being a man, being a father, being a citizen of the planet, and telling the truth, no matter what the consequences? Because to tell the truth while you can matters, and to be silent and cower in the corner while the entire ship goes down won't save you. It won't save you. And if everyone stands up together, and those academicians and biologists and agency experts that are listening to this broadcast, when will you tell the truth? How long will you try to protect your paychecks and pensions at the cost of the entire planet going down? How long? I ask that question. How long? And the denial that comes from the quote-unquote experts is so utterly and totally absurd, that vaccinations are safe, that fluoride's good for you to drink, that there's nothing going on in our skies, that buildings just fall down for no good reason, like Building 7, the third building that fell in 9/11, that most Americans don't even know existed. At what point do we connect the dots? At what point do we wake up and use our sense of reason and face the full truth while there's still something left to salvage? And I hope everyone listening to this show hears what I'm about to say right now. Just criticisms of the actions of the Trump administration is not an endorsement of any other fraction of the power structure. The Clintons were criminals, as were the Bushes. But those facts do not excuse any actions of the Trump administration. All of us must abandon our trained, dichotomous, black and white thinking. The Clintons and the Bushes are no longer in the White House. Trump is. Again, dichotomous thinking must be abandoned. The world is not black and white. It's much more complex. Accurate conclusions cannot be arrived at without honest and objective investigation. Ideology, bias, and preconception only taint the lens through which we are trying to see the world. A lens that must be clear if we are to have any chance of changing the course of the human race at this late hour. What's the bottom line? What matters most? If Earth's life support systems are damaged beyond repair, as I've said over and over in so many shows, that's the end of the road. The vast majority of the human race completely takes for granted the miracle planet on which we live. So many miraculous systems have combined in a way that has allowed us to exist and live and thrive on this planet. And those systems are being completely disintegrated by unimaginably destructive human activity. With climate engineering, the epitome of insane human endeavors, but by no means the only source of destruction on our planet from human activity. Too many people, even in the anti-climate engineering movement, want to believe that somehow this is the only problem with the planet. That couldn't be further from the truth. It's the single greatest threat we face, short of nuclear cataclysm, but even if we can expose and stop climate engineering, we face unimaginable challenges because our species has been unimaginably destructive to the planet, unimaginably poor stewards of the planet. And we are required to be stewards, by the way, of the planet. And as I've shared also in previous shows, I'm saddened to say that almost without exception, every spiritual institution leader that I've spoken to in Northern California face to face, their initial response when I try to pass on climate engineering data, their initial response is, we don't need to see that. It's all in big hands. We don't need to worry. And I ask them to show me in Scripture where it says that. Show me where it says you can sit down and do nothing and willfully watch this incredible planet, this miraculous creation be destroyed out of sheer greed and gluttony. Show me in Scripture where it says that's okay. And they can't. And I've shamed them into taking that material. And if you're in a congregation with a pastor who is simply towing the line for the power structure because that's what secures their 501 nonprofit, then you need to stand up. And you need to gather others in your congregation to stand up and say, tell us the truth. Tell us the full truth. And don't let monetary interests dictate your omission of the truth. That's not what spirituality is about. That's not what these institutions should be built on. That's not what biblical text is about. It's about telling the truth. And if your pastor, if your church is not telling you the truth, then hold them accountable. Hold them accountable. Back to the planet. Earth's atmospheric oxygen content is plummeting. How long will we be here if that continues? When we have 50 to 60% of Earth's plankton populations now gone, and that rate is accelerating. Plankton is the largest source of oxygen on the planet. Second largest source is Earth's forests, tropical and boreal. And they are dying at unimaginable pace. We've already lost 55 to 60%, same as the plankton, of Earth's forests. How long will we be here? And as that oxygen content plummets, we become less and less healthy. How many people already know when someone is very unhealthy, what do? They put them on oxygen because their system can't make it without more oxygen. But when the total oxygen content of the planet, the atmosphere plummets, how can that not affect all of us? Every living thing. And we look at landscapes like, here's a headline, by the way. This will plug into what I'm talking about, what we've done to the planet. The apocalyptic landscapes of Alberta's oil sands. For those who support this type of absolute raping of the planet and the life support systems on which our lives depend, you need to get a clue that the human race can't live like this any longer or we won't be here. And I challenge anyone to search that title. Search the apocalyptic landscapes of Alberta's oil sands and look at some of the photographs. It's staggering. Complete obliteration of environments. Total toxification. And that's only one sample. Only one sample. Rainforests, tropical forests, and locations all over the globe are being torn down for industrialization. This can't continue. And what's the fallout? As oxygen content plummets, as climate engineering is going on, which is changing convection, which is holding some of the more toxic air near the surface level, what happens? Here's a headline to elaborate on that. Toxic air hits top, quote, black alert level in London. From that report, toxic air hit the top black alert in London today, this is last week, leading to schools in the center of the capital restricting time outdoors for young children. I know about this. because I grew up in the smoggiest location of Southern California, and we sometimes had recesses stopped, ball games stopped, because the air was so bad, by the end of the day, you literally could hardly breathe in. And although, to some degree, those initial toxic conditions waned for a while with pollution control laws on automobiles and factories, those greenhouse gases, those toxins have continued to build up. Climate engineering has added unimaginable toxic atmospheric loading with particulates to the equation. It's capping convection now, which helps to hold that bad air down as well. All of this is building up. How hard is it to understand? Most people, if they stop and think, we're on a ball of rock in an incredibly hostile environment called space. Without our atmosphere, we wouldn't be here. Obviously, that atmosphere holds in the heat. When you add to that atmosphere greenhouse gases that hold even more heat in, what must happen? The heat must build, and it is building. And the cure from the military-industrial complex is climate engineering. A cure that, if it continues, will ensure our near-term omnicide on this planet. Time to wake up. Another headline. Is geoengineering the cause of high levels of aluminum in bumblebees? That's the headline from that report. Recent university study shows high levels of aluminum in bumblebees may be the cause of decline in population. Well, certainly a cause, no question. From that report, a recent study published on the Journal of Public Library of Science links aluminum as a contributing factor to the decline of bumblebees. Why is this a surprise? We've had already for almost 3 years, peer-reviewed study proving massive amounts of aluminum, which is coming down in our air column, which all our agencies, like the EPA and the rest, are systematically denying for all the reasons I've already stated in the show. In the meantime, the ship continues to go down with everything on it dying. Finishing from this report, there has been much debate on what is causing the rapid loss of insect species from pesticides to pollution. Report continues, bees rely heavily on cognitive function. They need to think, as we need to think. And this is what I've told people over and over and again. If you're breathing in, let's relate this to the bees right now. If you're breathing in toxic heavy metals that are known to cause neurological problems and massive cognitive decline, and you're breathing that in with every breath from the climate engineering programs, what other challenge will you face when you can't think clearly? You'll die as the bees are dying. How big a red flag do we need? We are all breathing in the same materials that these bees are absorbing. How long will we be here if this continues? I want to repeat that line on the report. Bees rely heavily on cognitive function, and aluminum is a known neurotoxin with links, for example, to Alzheimer's disease in humans. Again, this is from a peer-reviewed report. Final statements from this report. The significant contamination of bumblebee pupae by aluminum raises the intriguing specter of cognitive dysfunction playing a role in their population decline. They can't think clearly. And the human species, our IQs are dropping. That's a statistical fact. Alzheimer's, off the charts. Dementia, off the charts. Every disease that we would relate to heavy metal exposure, starting with aluminum, barium, every disease related to those elements is going off the charts. And this report, peer-reviewed study on the dying of the bees, proving aluminum is a major contributing factor, should be a massive red flag for all of us. Another headline, also related to climate engineering. Deadly record snowfall for the U.S. West, crushing buildings, heavy rains and floods in California dumped a record amount of snow on Mammoth Mountain. And these are the types of headlines the power structure needs. These are the types of headlines the geoengineers are trying to create, because it confuses and divides the population. How could there be global warming when we have record snow? Welcome to climate engineering. Welcome to chemical ice nucleation for weather modification. That's a NASA patent. Chinese government actively doing this, and I've stated over and over in many shows, and I hope some people listening might take the time to actually do this. Look up Chinese scientists create artificial snowstorms. Popular Science, Fox News, all covered it. Does anyone that's thinking rationally think that our government isn't far more advanced than the Chinese government? They're chemically nucleating snowstorms. How else can you have these massive weather whiplashes that swing 50, 60, 70 degrees in a single day? Because the chemical nucleation process creates a cold zone on the ground, highly toxic cold zone, but nonetheless a cold zone. It's chemically nucleated material, and this is what's occurring. And it's killing everything, including fish in the streams, insects, and everything else. Connect the dots, please. And as they do this, the overall atmosphere, they are trying to keep the humidity from building up. The atmospheric RH, relative humidity, because water is also a greenhouse gas. What does that do? When they try to create certain floods in certain places, but yet overall they're drying the atmosphere out, creates more fires. As I've stated before, on the wildfire issue, which then feeds into a feedback loop, which further warms the planet. So many roads lead back to climate engineering, but on the fires, geoengineering causes a massive disruption in the hydrological cycle, thus the droughts we've seen in so many areas that keep repeating. It destroys the ozone layer, thus massive amounts of UV radiation are killing forests. It poisons the root systems with the same elements I've already talked about. You have more dry lightning because you have a more electrically conductive atmosphere, so more fires. So here's a headline from this last week that plugs into that. Massive wildfires cause greatest forest disaster in Chile's history. We don't hear much about that, do we? No, we don't, because our media would rather distract us with other issues. Another headline, Europe faces droughts, floods, and storms as climate change accelerates. It is accelerating rapidly. This is global warming, and the term climate change, as I mentioned, which is being made worse by climate engineering. Why would we expect otherwise? The climate change term was implemented in 1998 when the warmest year to that point had occurred, and the climate engineering programs were ramped up radically, causing the sort of weather whiplash I just outlined. Thus, they needed a term that would make the population believe that such radical fluctuations were somehow a part of this normal process. They are not. These radical weather whiplash changes are a result of climate engineering, but that does not mean that the climate is not warming. It's warming radically, and there are countless human sources. Countless. It's not just climate engineering. Remember that. And here's a headline from one of the most well-known anti-global warming activists / hypocrites on the planet. The Rockefeller Foundation funded Bill McKibben. Total hypocrite. And he, like the spiritual leaders I mentioned earlier, is more worried about preserving his 501 nonprofit than he is telling the truth. So he never mentions the single biggest climate disrupting factor of all, climate engineering. Here's the headline. The new battle plan for the planet's climate crisis. The story has just been published in the Rolling Stone. No mention of climate engineering. The giant elephant in the room remains invisible because the corporate media won't mention it, and the nonprofit quote-unquote environmentalists like Bill McKibben and his group also won't mention it. They stay in their comfort zones, they protect their nonprofits, and they thus become liars by omission. You can't legitimately discuss the climate without discussing climate engineering first. Another headline about the fish dying that I mentioned, the warming waters, the toxic waters. Here's the headline. The gross reason your salmon is about to get even more expensive. Gross meaning, in this case, not pleasant. From that report, salmon grow in large farms like Norway are especially susceptible to sea lice, which are an increasing menace to anyone trying to make a living from farming fish. The report continues. Seeing the concerns as a threat to the industry, fish farmers beefed up their standards, especially when it came to using chemicals. That's nice, isn't it? To kill parasites like sea lice. By the way, farmed salmon, one of the most toxic elements you can eat, period. Slowly, fish farming gained acceptance by sweeping the facts under the rug, by the way. Report continues, but the sea lice weren't done. A bigger problem is that the sea lice, which can be fatal to salmon, are beginning to show resistance. What a surprise. Just like the chemicals used on all our farms, we had in the 1940s about 12 pest-resistant pests for farming. Now we have 600 plus because nature responds. You can't win a war against nature. You can't, and we won't. And so now we have the same thing happening with these pests to the salmon. And by the way, also, the waters are warming, which is a problem. That causes them to deoxygenate. That's a problem. There's tons of chemicals. That's a problem. They're using tons of antibiotics on the salmon. That's a problem. And the only reason we have much salmon in the stores is because the natural salmon are almost all dead in many locations. In fact, the steelhead run in the West Coast has crashed 90 to 95%, some areas 99%, a crash. Just the beginning. Now, the carelessness of the human race and the destructive tendencies of the human race is outlined in this headline. Japan studying disposal of highly radioactive waste under the seabed. This report has to be heard to be fully comprehended. The Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry in Japan has started work on identifying the technical challenges, which means they don't have any idea how to do this, of constructing a disposal facility under the seabed for highly radioactive spent nuclear fuel. What a great idea. Huh? Let's just bury it out in the ocean somewhere as if they're not contaminating everything already. The report continues. The government would be able to skip potentially tough negotiations with landowners if it decides to build a disposal facility under the seabed. Let's just throw it into the ocean so we don't have to negotiate with property owners that are too smart to let nuclear waste be buried on their land. Report continues more. But construction of such a facility would involve many hurdles. What a surprise is that? Continuing, such a facility would have to be connected to an onshore facility through a tunnel so as not to violate an international law that restricts dumping nuclear waste at sea, which is basically what they're doing. Candidates' sites are expected to be 10 to 15 kilometers off the coast, an official from the Nuclear Waste Management Organization of Japan said at the meeting. The ministry also plans to take into account the nearby volcanoes and active faults when it assesses the candidate sites. That's a good idea, isn't it? Are they going to build now a nuclear dump site 15 kilometers out on top of a fault line? There's no sanity in any of this. This should be unimaginably alarming to us. Fukushima, in its current condition, aside from this new toxic waste dump, this nuclear waste dump, Fukushima already may kill us all if other factors don't first, because it's a triple nuclear volcano with no technology known to fix it. And it continues. What's happening with our oceans, and this is not just a direct result of Fukushima, by the way, there are many other causes. Here's the headline, thousands of dead fish once again washing up along Suncoast beaches in Florida. Red tide causing respiratory irritation to the beach goers. So we have again Canfield Ocean, a warming, stratifying ocean that's deoxygenating, filled with toxic elements, nuclear and otherwise, gassing from the seabed because the oceans are warming. Formerly frozen methane hydrate and hydrogen sulfide deposits are gassing into the oceans. We are on the fast track to near-term extinction on this course. Another headline, mass ocean die-off after another week of carnage across the globe for fish and marine mammals. Reports flood in of mass die-offs. Think about that headline from last week. Yet another week of carnage across the globe for sea creatures. It's happening everywhere, and we hear nothing about it here in the U.S. Nothing about it. Another headline, sea level rise estimates grow alarmingly higher in latest federal study. The land is not sinking everywhere around the globe. When ice melts, it runs into the sea, and the seas rise. Those who doubt this is happening, you are simply ignoring your sense of reason. You've done no legitimate investigation. It's not about Al Gore. It's not about carbon credits. It's about reality. Look at reality. We have film footage of ice disappearing from all over the globe. What do we think happens to that melting ice water? It goes into the oceans, and the oceans rise, and that's happening very rapidly now. And these reports will continue to come in. Another headline, abnormal Antarctic heat, surface melt, giant cracks in ice shelves. There's a situation in Antarctica right now that looks something like out of the Day After Tomorrow film. A massive piece of Antarctic ice is about to break off, which will allow the glacial flow off the land-based ice to increase rapidly. It's happening now. Another headline. Now, I want this headline to be considered because so many people look at a headline like this and never investigate it. And they use it as proof that there's no global warming. They ignore their sense of reason. They ignore the film footage I just mentioned. They ignore all the undeniable facts that are verifiable film footage because they look at a headline like this. The 30,000 global warming petition from scientists that supposedly debunks global warming. Here's a headline that relates to this. The 30,000 global warming petition is easily debunked. Propaganda from that report. The total percentage of signatures on that petition with a background in climate change science is a whopping 0.5%. 0.5%, not 5%, 0.5, which is 0.5%. Continuing from this report on that study, the petition does not break down the names of those who claim to be experts in climatology and atmospheric science, which makes even that 0.5% questionable. This is a total fraud, but yet those who are operating off ideology, preconception, and bias want anything they can cling on to convince them of what they want to believe. This is the nature of our species. We must change that nature. We must start searching for the unvarnished truth. We must investigate the reasons for our conclusions. Why do we believe what we believe? Have we really investigated honestly and objectively? Another headline, World Health Organization call on all countries to monitor closely outbreaks of the deadly avian flu virus as deadly flu pandemic expected to hit humans. Isn't it convenient that these outbreaks occur in sort of waves with new viruses, unexpected viruses, and why would we think that there's no connection to the massive biological testing that's going on in almost 400 labs even in the U.S.? What do we think they're doing there? When they're experimenting with pathogens, that's what they do. Is it a surprise that these pathogens keep popping up in areas where it helps to maneuver certain geopolitical goals or cause chaos and disruption when too many people are perhaps waking up too quickly and when they can't find anything to eat because everything they eat, like ducks and birds and chickens, are all dying? They're not too concerned about the bigger picture. They're concerned about their next bite of food. If we think that our governments are not experimenting with pathogens all over the globe, when we have historical precedents for this, our own government, 24 cases experimenting on their own populations, if you think this isn't going on, you're not living in reality. So let's get to the bottom line. This is a headline. The 6th world mass extinction is now. This is a headline from last week. I know I've given facts and figures on this before, but sometimes such facts and figures need repeating. We are losing 200 to 300 species of plant, animal, and insect a day to extinction. That's 15,000 times the normal background extinction rate. That's 1.5 million% of normal. What's happening now is exponentially faster than at any other mass extinction in Earth's history. These are statistical facts. Please investigate. That's all I'm asking. I never ask anyone to believe anything I say. I'm simply asking for you to honestly investigate. Now, where are the scientists on all this? Let's look at that. Here's another headline. Scientists are planning their own march on Washington, given all the things I said earlier in this show, the gag orders, the attempt to hide information. And that attempt will continue because the government does not want the population to panic. If they knew exactly what was happening, we would have panic in the streets right now. So as the government and this new administration try to hide reality from the population, as previous administrations have also done, except it's much more severe now, we have this headline. Again, scientists are planning their own march in Washington, D.C. And they're marching to protest the silencing of dire environmental data. But I would ask this, when will the scientific community tell the full truth? When will the climate science community confess to the climate engineering elephant in the room? That is a massive part of the equation. In fact, again, statistically, the single greatest and most immediate threat we face, short of nuclear cataclysm, because every day that passes, every day we inhale this material, every day the web of life absorbs this material, toxic, neurologically damaging material, aluminum, barium, strontium, manganese, lead, we are becoming less functional, less capable of facing any challenge. Another breaking headline story. This is a headline. Earth has crossed its own tipping point and is creaking under the strain. 2/3 of animals will be extinct by 2020. 2/3. Think about that. Final part of the headline, climate change. Climate is changed forever. World population to hit 8 billion and accelerating. That part's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. We're not going to get there. In fact, statistically, that's a certainty at this point, short of some unforeseen factor. We are on the cusp of a very different reality. So this accelerating population, which of course could never continue, and anybody who thinks it could, and anybody who claims that all the world's population could fit into New Zealand or Texas, that doesn't matter. It's about habitat. It's not about elbow room, it's about habitat, a habitat that supports life. And we have destroyed that habitat. And that's the bottom line. The economy and all the other rhetoric that we see on corporate news every day means nothing when the biosphere no longer functions, when we've lost our habitat. It's not about the economy. The economy doesn't have a life of its own. Everything is built around a planet that supports life. When will the human race realize that? Some of the elite are realizing that. Here's a headline: Doomsday Prep for the Super Rich. From that report, some of the wealthiest people in America, in Silicon Valley, New York, and beyond, are getting ready for the breakdown of civilization. Now, we know they're preparing. They're buying much of New Zealand. You can research what I just stated there. All of this is verifiable for any that choose to look. Those at the top of the food chain are preparing. Make no mistake about that. And let's remember two other headlines. Chilling legal memo. This is an older headline, but it matters. Chilling legal memo from Obama. DOJ justifies assassination of U.S. citizens. And let's plug that headline into what I brought up in so many previous shows. In the 2010 census, every single one of our doorsteps was GPSed. What do you think that's about? How easy would it be for a few to control the masses if they had everybody's doorstep GPSed and they had drones to control, which could take out anybody, anywhere, anytime? And if you think that our government wouldn't do this, think again. We're already being slow-killed, whatever the agenda. When we're breathing in what they're spraying for climate modification, it's killing all of us slowly. If they change that mix at any point in time, the whole equation changes. If a more lethal element is put into the climate operations materials, they could level the playing field any time they want. I'm running out of time on this show. I want to summarize. We live in a world in which countless people show up and are willing to participate in countless distractions and celebrations like the Super Bowl. Yet how many will join in an activism effort to help wake the masses to the fact that the biosphere, which facilitates our very survival, is collapsing by the day? How many are willing to make their voices heard on issues relating to our survival? While the legions of economists rant on and on about the cycles of the economy, with virtually no reference to the consideration that when the environment dies, we die. How simple is that fact to comprehend? As I stated earlier, there is also the legions of so-called survivalists that are stocking up on weapons and ammunition. And I would ask this: will any of that matter when the planet no longer supports life? The human race has shown unimaginable contempt towards nature, the atmosphere, and the planet as a whole. Unfortunately, so much of the human race is still either actively or passively participating in the collective insanity, the suicidal tendencies of our species, without consciously considering the bigger picture, that the whole ship is going down, and we're all on it. The majority of industrialized societies, the individuals that live in them, are terrified of the unvarnished truth. And thus, anyone who tries to speak the full truth is demonized and marginalized by our power structure controlled media. Their goal: pacify the populations until the last possible moment. How do we wake those around us, our family and our friends? By sharing credible, straightforward, verifiable data. Solid, informational, fact-filled flyers are extremely effective. Flyers can be downloaded from geoengineeringwatch.org for free and printed locally. There are many informational presentations on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org, fact-filled presentations that can be used in film viewings for family and friends. Also, on the vaccination issue, there are incredibly powerful documentaries like Vaxxed and Silent Epidemic by Gary Knoll, also two powerful films. The 9/11 Architects and Engineers for Truth, 3,000 of the world's top architects and engineers making clear the official story is scientifically impossible, the story on 9/11. Hold film viewings with your family and friends. Help to sow the seeds of awareness. Help in the critical battle to sound the alarm. Help us to alter the current course of the human race. Time is not on our side. Until next week, This is Dane Wigington with GeoEngineeringWatch.org.
Anti-Media Radio with your host Nick Burnaby here on UCY